Welcome back to the program, everybody. We're thrilled to be kicking off Season 3 of Grow Organically. This is our 25th episode. Hard to believe that it's been 25 since we started this little project, but I want to thank everybody who's listened, who shared the podcast with their friends, reached out about something they've learned. The purpose of this podcast is to share best practices and share unique perspectives on the industry. With the launch of Season 3, we also now have video episodes up on YouTube. So if you haven't already, please check that out and give us a follow wherever you like to listen. So with that, let's dive in. I am thrilled to have my friend Mary Kate Gulick on the program today. Mary Kate's the founder of MK Wealth Marketing, consulting with a number of firms on topics from growth to branding and so much more. She, prior to founding MK Marketing, she spent some time at FICOM, Carson, TD Ameritrade, IBM, and before that, a number of other marketing roles. Extensive experience in marketing for financial services, in particular wealth. Quite the background, Mary Kate. And I know I've missed something, so please fill in the blanks.
Yeah, there's not a lot of blanks to fill in. Every time I hear somebody do a bio of me, I'm like, I'm old. But that's okay. Yeah, I've been in marketing since I was a wee little early 20-something, and the bulk of it has been around wealth management and financial services in general. When I was at an agency, one of my first clients ever was TD Ameritrade before the TD. So been doing this a while, and I have tried to kind of move out and broaden my horizons with other industries, but I just keep getting pulled back in. I'm a nerd for this stuff,
Well, it's what you know and it's what you love.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But I am so glad to be here on episode 25. I didn't realize three seasons. If you're on,
yeah,
that's pretty exciting. You are like a genuine veteran at this now.
Well, I don't know about that, but I still think of this as a little science experiment. But grateful for you and for all the guests that we've had on prior and guests of future episodes for sharing so much wisdom and insight into the market.
Yeah, super happy to be included.
So Season 3, we're kicking off here and excited to have you on this first episode to talk a little bit about some work that we've been doing together. And I am personally really excited about this episode and the work that we've done and what we're going to talk about. Just recently, about a month ago, Catchlight launched the RIA Growth Marketing Proficiency Report. This was an idea that you and I had at one point last year. We were kicking around different ideas of where and how we might be able to help the market, help folks understand where they fit in with their peers, and ultimately help them understand what does good look like. From a benchmarking perspective, where are they relative to the rest of the market? The market continues to talk about growth. I was just at a conference last week in the Midwest, and everybody's talking about the need for growth, but there's a lot of gaps in knowledge about where they need to focus. What are the characteristics of those firms that are growing? What do their teams look like? So that was the impetus for putting this report together, and excited to talk about it. Gives firms an opportunity to benchmark themselves, simply put, against others in the market. So that's sort of my preamble, Mary Kate. I'd love to hear why you think this report's so important and so insightful.
For sure. I think for me, this was the report that I wished that I had, in front of me for the last 7 years. We all want to know what other advisory firms are doing. Most importantly, we want to know what the ones who are growing organically are doing. And we first have the problem to solve of what does organic growth even mean? So when we, strip out all the M&A, strip out all the market growth, who's bringing in new clients and new money from existing clients? That's what we want to know. And simple formula. But the hard question, once you agree on that, is great. In what way are the ones that are growing, doing things differently than the ones that aren't, which sounds like a simple question. But it's not. Every firm has its own DNA. Every firm has its own worldview about what should be driving growth and what they're going to take on. And they all kind of start from the same place, which is when a firm just starts when it's small, largely they grow by referral. And that can continue on indefinitely. But at some point, referrals are incapable of generating a percentage of growth, and you have to look somewhere else to get those new clients. And the question then becomes, who looks somewhere else in an effective, systematic way that they're willing to fund, and who just tries to pound referrals even harder. And that's largely what we saw as we looked across the cohort of firms that we surveyed and talked to.
Awesome. Well, I know I've been on the road a little bit, even just the beginning of this year and last year.
You're always on the road, Dan.
Some pre-conversations prior to launch, and I've had a lot of firms tell me how grateful they are to now have this view into the market, knowing what matters. What are the characteristics, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes. But the characteristics of high growth versus those with maybe lower growth. Curious if you've had any feedback from the market.
Really, the big things that I've been hearing have been from, we'll kind of get into the profiles a little bit, but from firm marketing leaders who kind of consider themselves a level 2, but who want to be a level 3, but they're unable to get that buy-in from a firm leadership level to invest from a staffing, technology, media perspective in order to make that happen. So the question that I've gotten a couple times is, how do we convince them that this is an investment worth making? Because they see that one of those big gaps that needs to be jumped is the willingness to consider marketing as a source of growth, and then fund that in the way that it needs to be funded to make that happen, because the investment that the growing firms are making are significantly different than those who are not.
Yeah, and it's a playbook of sorts. If you want to get from, and the levels, and we're going to jump into that in just a minute, but from, a level 1 to a level 2 all the way up to a level 4, there's certain work, there's certain structure, there's certain hiring that comes along with that. But I think as you look into the report, you can see the output of that is meaningful to firms as they level up their growth programs, their staff, their technology. There are tangible outputs from that. So let's jump in. So we defined 4 different proficiency levels. As we did this work, talked to the firms, surveyed them, and maybe to give the audience some framing. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the methodology, because I think it's important to understand sort of baseline. How do we collect this information? How do we collect this insight? Where did it come from? Who did it come from? And why is it a good foundation against which we could measure the proficiency level of all these different firms?
Yeah, it's a great question and an important one. So the firms that we looked at were the Barron's 100 from 2024. So the Barron's 100 independent RIAs, the top 100. And we reached out to all of them, and we got about a 20% response rate. And who we talked to were the either the existing marketing leaders in the firms, or marketing consultants that were deeply embedded within the firms who understood the structure of things. And the way that we got the information, some of them wanted to fill out a survey and kind of pull the data together and do it in written format. Some people wanted to have an interview type conversation that we could record, and some of them wanted to do both. So there was a combination of ways. Largely the questions were the same. We were looking for the same data overall. And so as we went through it and kind of coded everything that was in the interviews and in the surveys, there were particular things that we were looking for. There were these very specific quantitative things about budget, what metrics you use, how big your team was, things that were not super subjective, not open for a lot of interpretation, right? And then on the other side of that, we were looking for the kind of qualitative information around the firm's culture and how they viewed marketing and what its role was in the organization. And while all the questions were the same, really, we didn't have an expectation of what that was going to generate. So that really was the thing that ended up sorting firms into the groups. Yes, things like how much they invested and how many people they had on their team definitely were factors in how they were sorted. But the belief of what marketing should do and what it was funded to do was a pretty serious consideration as well that we discovered as we kind of got into it.
Awesome. So maybe we'll just share the levels. What we found in surveying the market. So there's the level ones. These are what we call the marketing generalists, all the way up to level 4, which is a data-driven masters. Maybe walk us through a little bit more of this level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. What those levels mean. A little bit more of what you just talked about, the attributes and things like that.
Absolutely. And before I get into the levels, what I want to say and make really clear is this: level 1 doesn't mean anyone's doing a bad job at marketing. What it means largely is that a level 1 or a level 2, their organizations, their firms have a different expectation of what marketing is supposed to deliver than what a level 3 and a level 4 does. So they can do an amazing job at delivering against those expectations. Those expectations may not be tied to AUM growth, and they are not tied to AUM growth. That's kind of the difference. So if you hear a lot about your own firm, if you start, really relating to, oh, I'm a level 1 or a level 2, it does not mean you're not doing an amazing job and that your team's not crushing it. It means that you have a set of expectations within your firm that you're there to hit, and these might not necessarily be growth expectations. So just want to make that super duper clear.
To put a point on that, and that's specifically why we call this the growth proficiency report versus a marketing proficiency report, because there are some awesome marketers out there, but they're doing things outside the realm of specifically focused on driving growth. So a great distinction.
Yes. So as we started looking at it, as Dan said, there were 4 levels. Level 1 are those marketing generalists, and you see this at a lot of firms. And of the cohort that we looked at, they made up, 33%, so a third. And this is really an organization where their marketing team is often a team of one. It's a one-person team, and they bring in that jack of all trades who can do all the marketing things, which, as we've learned, especially over the last 10 years, marketing is not one discipline. Marketing is probably 20 or 25 very distinct disciplines kind of rolled into one label. So it's hard to find someone who can do everything. And typically this person ends up being a little more junior and a little less specialized. So the work that they end up doing is prettying up a one sheet. A lot of those things that's really about the admin and visual attractiveness of marketing materials. So they're not setting a strategy generally. They have very little, if any, budget to work with and no control over that budget. And they are not necessarily viewed as a strategic partner within the organization at large. How the organization views marketing as they're the ones who make us look professional and get our brand out there. And typically at level 1, those are not things that are measured. It's very hard to measure getting your brand out there and expensive to measure it as well. So it's really kind of anecdotal how that's looked at. Oh, I saw our billboard on the way in. You're doing a great job versus Why isn't the radio spot playing, at 9 p.m. when I walk my dog? We're not necessarily looking at quantitative data to measure those things.
And then we get to level 2.
There's a big difference between the two. These are typically much larger teams. So these are called our multidisciplinary teams. Now, they're generally not held accountable for AUM growth or new client acquisition goals either. They are typically in an organization where business development is a separate function, and these two functions are not necessarily aligned. But our multidisciplinary teams are really focused on brand awareness, website traffic, growing social media presence. So there are some metrics here, but they tend to be more about who's looking at us, who knows us. So here you'll have the multidisciplinary part. You will have somebody who is in charge of content. You'll have someone who's in charge of design. You'll have your digital marketing specialist. And you may very well have a marketing leader within this team. This leader is not typically at the C-suite level. They're not usually, able to have a seat at the table of firm-wide strategy, but they have their marketing strategy. It just isn't necessarily aligned to firm growth goals. So typically, these teams are well run generally, but they don't have the budget or the headcount that they want to have the impact that they want to have. And they don't have that alignment to either firm level goals or business development measurements to really understand how their work impacts new client acquisition and AUM growth.
Are they starting to look at the funnel here in level 2?
Potentially. Some of them were, but it was always almost a separate funnel, like a marketing funnel versus a sales funnel.
Okay.
Right. So, you have our people who look, you have our people who opt into a consideration tactic. Perhaps they download something or they attend a webinar, but they didn't speak about people as leads or opportunities the way that a business development team would. And there was really no handoff between marketing and business development for those people. So they might consider them deep funnel, but it would only be deep marketing funnel.
It's visits and clicks versus meetings set, appointments set, meetings held, things like that are more on the business development, lower level, and certainly not a connection to. We'll get to that in level 4. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. So level 3, what's the difference? As we, now we're leveling up. We're probably talking about more data. We're probably talking about a little bit more responsibility, maybe some visibility to AUM growth at the CXO level.
Yes, and this is our growth-focused explorers, and we call them explorers for a reason, because these teams tended to be pretty new into the worldview that no, marketing's not just here to get the brand out there and to make things look attractive. Marketing is here to help generate new clients, and that's what you're accountable for. So typically, these are teams who have gone through kind of a significant shift in the last couple of years. So now the teams are larger. The types of people they're hiring are very different. They're very specialized.
Yep.
They're working with quite a few outside vendors, both on the technology side and on the media buying side, to do more performance marketing than brand marketing. And they're not looking at visits anymore. Now they're looking at leads and cost per lead, and then looking to see how many of those leads are qualified by their business development partners, so that they can measure the quality of what they're bringing in, and then eventually trying to draw that through line from the leads that we bring in to the AUM that comes in. And they're making those investments in the data. Typically, their budgets are about 3 times what we would see in a level 1 team, from a 3 to 5 times larger from a percent of revenue. And they grow at we're looking, their 2024 growth across the level 3 teams was 10%, which was significant compared to everyone else. They do have some M&A, but their M&A is not their primary focus. Their primary focus is organic growth, and they have funded and staffed those teams and are measuring those teams in a way that that is 100% focused on clients and AUM in the door.
And that 10%, just to go back to the definition, is net new assets from new clients, net new assets from existing clients.
That's exactly right. And why that's important, because it excludes market growth.
Yeah.
2024 and 2023, they were great market growth years. And so when we look at the total growth of an organization, you take out the M&A, and then you take out, in 2023, a very significant chunk of market growth. And what we saw with a lot of the level 1 and level 2 teams is that they experienced negative organic growth. Now, that doesn't mean they were losing clients. It certainly doesn't mean that they were doing a bad job. We're looking at AUM, and in our world, a lot of clients are in drawdown phase if they're entering retirement. There was a lot of portfolio shifting in 2023 when think people were a little bit unsure of how things were going to go in the market. So there's a lot of reasons that we may have seen that. But what we do know is that the client acquisition was significantly greater on the level 3 and level 4 teams.
Yeah. So let's talk for maybe just a minute on the level 4s. These are what we call the data-driven masters. Tell us a little bit more about them.
And this is, when it comes to growth marketing, it's what the level 3s are really trying to get to, and they're actively trying to get here. And the way this panned out for us is because this team was able to so significantly invest in its marketing growth engine. They had larger teams. They had a larger percentage of growth, but they also had the most significant technology and outsourcing buys. So they were spending quite a lot of money, and these were the largest firms overall. So when you think about your aggregators and your mega RIAs, if they were in level 4, they fell into that category. And there's a couple reasons. One, that they were growing their marketing function for a while, and they've gone through that level 3 experience already. They've gone through that exploration and are at a place where they know what is working. They're investing in, 45, 50 different lead sources, and they're able to triage those leads and only work with the most effective ones because they have external partners like Catchlight, and they're able to make those technology investments and invest in call centers within the firms. So they have just matured from level 3 to the point where they've really dialed in their measurement and their specialization, their marketing specialists. So they're not looking at marketing generalists anymore. They're very much focused on performance marketing hires, performance marketing partners. And these are teams that have a real marketing leader, a chief marketing officer, chief growth officer, who sits at the strategic table firm-wide and drives firm strategy. So those firm growth strategies and marketing strategies are in lockstep with one another.
Awesome. Love it. Defining the levels, I suspect it's not fair to say, a certain level equals a certain growth rate. There could be folks that are in level 1, level 2 that are, have decent growth rates. Level 3, level 4, those growth rates could be good relative to the size of the firm. The bigger the firm, the more challenging it gets. I was chatting with a partner of ours a couple of weeks ago. They're north of 100 billion in assets, and the chief growth officer sort of pulled me aside and said, look, the challenge is we're so big, to continue to grow 10%, I need to add 10 billion in AUM. So this is a pretty sophisticated, clearly a level 4 operation. But how should folks think about maybe where they are on the level and where they are in a growth trajectory? And because I don't think there's a direct correlation between the two. But how should folks be thinking about that?
You're right. There's not a direct correlation between the two, except, when we get to a size where organic growth makes it very hard to drive the kind of percentage AUM growth that they're needing to drive. So what we did see in those large firms, there's a significantly more pronounced focus on inorganic growth, M&A.
Mhm.
Organic growth is still very important, but in order to hit those percentages, they need to be bringing in new teams and new firms under their umbrella. But no, you're exactly right. Across really 1, 2, and 3, size is not what mattered. And there are level 1 teams who are still able to grow really powerfully by referral because their total AUM is not to a place where they can, or where they've had to diversify away from that. I can drive 25% organic growth just on referrals if I am a $50 million firm. I can do that.
Yeah.
I can't do it if I am a $5 billion firm.
It's tough.
That's exactly right. So the thing to look at is, where are you in your own maturity curve as a firm? And don't look at the marketing team and how it's structured now. Look at what the organic growth goal is. If I am a $100 million firm, can I add $25 million in a year just from referrals? It gets a little harder at that point, but it's possible. And so the question is, when do you start needing marketing? And the answer is different for every firm based on the kind of rainmaking skill you already have under your belt. But the fact is, at some point in every firm's trajectory, you can't scale human rainmakers. And there's only so far that referrals can take you numerically. If every advisor only has a maximum of 75 clients, they can only get a maximum of X number of referrals from a lead perspective. There's a cap on that. And at some point, every firm that's growing is going to need to lift that cap and diversify their lead sources. And marketing is really the only way to do that.
Love that. And so I'm going to transition. So we've defined the levels, and I think it's really important. And again, level 1 is not bad. Level 4 is not great. It really depends on the stage of the firm and the objectives of the firm. But the other thing that came out of this study, which I think is sort of fascinating, that as firms seek to, they want to dial up their growth. They want to go from, maybe they're a level 2, they're a level 3. They want to dial up to a level 4. They're willing to make investments, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but they want to level up. They're looking for that 10% organic, which I think is a pretty good number to shoot for in today's market. So let's call those the faster growing firms. There are what we discovered is 5 key attributes for those faster growing. And again, it could be level 2, 3, or 4. It's not level specific. It's more the firms that are growing faster. Love to chat just briefly about each one of those, and maybe I'll give the headline and you fill in the reason behind it. We talked about level 1. Sort of the generalist hire, somebody, maybe there's just one person, maybe 2, and they're sort of the jack of all trades. The faster growing firms, a clear shift from hiring those generalists to specialists in different areas. Maybe some quick feedback on that one.
And that's really an important distinction, because that goes from looking at marketing from a discipline to multiple disciplines, and the understanding that not every one of those disciplines is a growth-oriented trade. Mm-hmm. And that the ones that are performance marketing, digital ads management, really good marketing analytics analysis, those particular skills are growth-oriented. And things like, managing overall campaigns are somewhat less focus towards that. So the understanding that, hey, if we're going to hold this team accountable for growth metrics, then we have to import the skills to generate that growth in one way or another, whether that's hiring internally or how we're outsourcing.
So accountability is key. Where does growth live within the organization? And I think one of the things that we found is that these high growth teams, firms, had part of their organization was specifically accountable for that AUM growth.
And I would say that that is probably the number one distinguisher between level 2 and level 3. The firm is that more of a organization-wide mindset shift that, okay, marketing's role is this. Marketing's role is to generate new clients, new AUM. And if that's their role, then we need to rethink what marketing actually is, how it looks, how we fund it, and how they're involved in the organization.
Yeah, I love you brought up funding, and that's one of the next ones that we saw is that there's an intentional investment. You talked about budgets before, so level 1, low budget, level 4, investments in people, in technology, in data, and it's very intentional. I think we see from some of the firms that sort of analyze the space, the amount of budget from a revenue perspective that goes against growth. And we may see 1%, we may see up to 7%. But I think one of the key findings here is intentional investment in growth.
Yeah. And at the level 1, their primary investment into marketing is that, one person, that one marketing generalist, and everything else is kind of an extra. Whereas and they're typically coming under 1% of revenue. And then we look at a level 3 and a level 4, suddenly we're looking at 3 to 5% and 5% plus, which are significantly larger. And headcount is not often the biggest part of that. But those external media buys, agencies, lead buys, technology partners, that's where a lot of that budget really goes. And that comes with the understanding that in order to grow, they've figured out their funnel, basically, that this is a numbers game, and that in order to get X percent of growth, we need this many clients. In order to get that many clients, we need this many meetings. In order to get this many meetings, we need this many leads. In order to get this many leads, we need lead sources that generate that many leads, which is going to cost this much. They can work backwards and justify that investment because they understand their funnel math.
Yeah, and that's the next one. The fourth key attribute is really being data driven, understanding that funnel. And I know in the report we share a little snippet of a fictitious firm that seeks to grow by X percent YAUM and what it's going to take and how to think about that funnel from leads through the top of the funnel all the way down to cost per qualified lead and ultimately CAC. But data driven, you have to be in order to that's what we're seeing in these level 3, level 4 firms.
The tricky part there is that data is only as good as the people who are making decisions about it, right? So you can have all the data in the world, and if you're not using it to consistently optimize at each conversion point, then what good is it? Mm-hmm. So making sure that you have a team and have the accountability to be making decisions and constantly acting on that data as it comes in is what matters.
Love it. Love it. We talked about accountability before. Somebody responsible for that AUM. And I think that fifth attribute that we see is those faster growing, larger firms have executive alignment. There's somebody from that growth team that is in the C-suite that has that number. They're accountable to it. The firm has invested in those teams to drive that, but there is very much clear alignment between what those goals are and the executive team.
Yes, because the growth goals for the firm they have to be what's driving growth marketing. If they are not in lockstep, and if that growth leader isn't contributing to those conversations to provide a feasibility check or say, yes, we can do this, but here's the resources that are required to make that happen, then there's no way for that team to meaningfully contribute. So having that growth strategy be really a drop down from the overall firm strategy, and having that leader there to translate that into tangible action by the team, what the staffing looks like, what the investment needs to look like. It's right, comes right to the question of strategy and execution. And if you have a great strategy, but it doesn't get executed properly, then it has ceased to be a great strategy. So having that level of leadership is critical.
Love it. Love it. All right. So last question for you. So at the beginning of this conversation, you said it was great to work on this because it's something that you wished you had 7 years ago. I think that was the number. I ask all my guests, and you probably know this already. But my last question is, if you knew then what you know now, what would you have told Mary Kate? 5 is what I usually ask, but I'm going to go 7 because you said 7. 7 years ago, Mary Kate's the in charge of growth at a firm. What advice would you get in a time machine and tell yourself 7 years ago?
My former self, yeah. I would tell, there are so many things, Dan. There are so many things. I would have told my former self over and over and over again that I know that you are falling desperately in love with the measurability of digital channels, but please remember that none of it means a darn thing if you don't have a message worth sharing. So it almost comes back to understanding where the brand part of marketing has to still live within this framework. Because we've watched firms pour money into digital marketing and have long payback periods before they're seeing what they need to see from it, because they're not making the connection, because the people that they want to be working with are glossing over what they're putting out in the world. So what I would tell myself back then is don't say it if it's not worth saying. Don't say it if nobody's going to hear it. So that creative part is always very important. The other thing that I would tell myself is that there is the number of lead sources that I'm going to need is beyond my imagination. Because 7 years ago, I couldn't have gotten my head around the idea of having 60 different lead sources, because you only need 2 or 3 that really work well. It was my always on understanding. Quality over quantity. Quality over quantity is a generally true statement. In this part of it, though, the volume that people are trying to achieve and that firms are trying to create, it requires quantity too. And because you have quantity, the ability to optimize on that quantity before human intervention is incredibly important. So if I had known that a little earlier, I could have avoided some landmines.
Well, the what you said first there, that the connection between messaging and ICP, maybe that'll be the subject of a future study that we can work on. There are some disconnects there.
I agree.
Well, Mary Kate, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the time and effort on this report. Been tons of fun working with you on it. I think it's created some great insights. Feedback I've received from the market has been super positive. So again, thank you for that. For folks interested in seeing the report, please head over to catchlight.ai, and you'll find a link on the homepage there and get access to the report. And if you have any questions, please hit us up. But Mary Kate, thank you again so much for being here today and working on the report with us.
It was my pleasure. It was really a labor of love. So glad I got the opportunity to do it, and very glad that I got to do it with you, my friend.
Thank you. All right, that wraps up episode 25, season 3's first episode. We'll see you back soon.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Organically podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit catchlight.ai, where you can access all our podcasts, including show notes and other resources to keep learning. This podcast was produced by Catchlight Insights, LLC. It is for informational and educational purposes only. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer or recommendation of any securities and is not intended to provide tax, legal, or investment advice. The views expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of Catchlight or its affiliates, and are as of the date indicated, based on the information available at that time, and may change based on market or other conditions. Catchlight does not assume any duty to update any of the information. Catchlight and other third parties mentioned in the podcast are independent entities and not affiliated. Catchlight does not endorse any investment advisor or provide advice or recommendations to any prospective or existing client of an investment advisor as to the selection or retention of that investment advisor. This information is not intended for any person or entity in any jurisdiction where the distribution or use of such information would be contrary to local law. Third-party trademarks referenced herein are the property of their respective owners. All others are the property of Catchlight Insights, LLC. Copyright 2025, Catchlight Insights, LLC. All rights reserved.